Don't train with bands if you want the most muscle growth. What? But I thought bands made us cool and biomechanists. Maybe, but maybe they have some downsides. Here are some ideas to consider, no dogma, about when you could be using bands and maybe how to put a skeptical eye to them. So let's get into it. Not a very long chat. Here's the thing. Especially recently, but with lots of data collected over time, lots of deep theory, it's becoming increasingly more clear that there may be something a little bit special about the bottom end of a rep, the very stretched position, in which the muscle is at a more lengthened state and then is asked to contract either eccentrically or concentrically or even isometrically. And when that contraction, that tension under stretch is allowed to develop, if much of your lifting is in that range of motion or at least hits that range of motion often, it seems like you get more hypertrophy per every unit of work you do in a deep stretch versus units of work you do close to lockout. For example, that's not 100% for sure, but a lot of data and ideas are really trending in that direction, right? Problem: most band setups load the shortened position. So if you're doing banded bench, the bottom's easier than normal. The top is really, really hard. The top is loaded preferentially more. Now, if you use a reverse band intelligently, you can actually get the bottom to be just as hard as it ever was, but because benching gets easier as you go up, you might be able to have the bottom as hard as ever was and the lockout even harder than in an unbanded condition. And you may think, now hold on a second, this is great. I get all the same tension at the bottom and I get even more tension at the top than normal. Wouldn't that make every single repetition of this lift more hypertrophic? And the answer is probably. However, every single rep is more hypertrophic, but way harder. So if you can do 15 reps at a certain weight with straight bench, that weight added up to be the weight that you feel at the bottom, but you got reverse bands on, so it's more weight. The total amount of load you're lifting is higher. Maybe you're taking that from 15 reps down to 10. Now, you got 10 reps, and every single one of them is a little bit more hypertrophic than the reps you would do which normal, but you'd have to do 15 of them. But however, the amount of fatigue you accumulate with every single one of those reps is higher. That's why you can only do 10 reps and not 15, because you have to try the entire rep maximum close, not like really hard at the bottom and a little bit more of a free ride on the top. And because much of the hypertrophy, maybe not most, but more than you would expect, comes from that bottom end, we have to count the number of bottom end exposures that you get total. If the reps with the reverse band make you so tired that you're only able to do 10 reps total for the set, you have 10 bottom end super stretch exposures that add up to how much hypertrophy you're getting. Not completely add up, but more than the other parts of range of motion. If you just do regular, get rid of the extra weight, get rid of the reverse bands, you just do your regular weight for a set of 15 close to failure, you get 15 bottom end exposures for hypertrophy and the same amount of total work, total fatigue. Same amount of total work, total fatigue, but we're talking about 15 bottom end exposures, real big stretch, versus 10. And in many cases, logically, at least at a first glance, it would look like that set of 15 may cause more hypertrophy than that set of 10, because relative to how much same amount of fatigue you put in, the reps adjust for that, you get fractionally more exposures at that deep position. Another way to think about it is this. If the deep stretch part is really the part that grows the most, you don't want to tire yourself out with lockouts because you want to come into the lockout easy and get in there and put as much stress as possible at that bottom position, right? So even the reverse banding and letting you expose yourself to more overall tension may be taking fractionally, relatively, some of that tension away from where it's hardest and putting it more into away from where it causes the most growth, not all growth, and putting more of the fraction of that total tension per rep into the upper part, the lockout, where it might not be as much growth promotion. But because you have to use a lot more weight, actually, let me change slides. Yeah. So if you are having to use a lot of weight, and the load is incredibly hard, especially let's say if you do hack squats banded or leg presses banded, that's a crap load of force throughput, especially in hack squats through your spine. And if you've ever reverse band hack squatted, it's an unbelievable amount of weight at the top. It's super hard. So you have to have sort of a choice. Do I want to potentially make my reps normal and experience that hardness mostly at the bottom where it probably causes more growth with less total weight causing me less overall fatigue? Or do I want more fatigue but kind of a similar exposure at the bottom? And actually, because I can do fewer reps, maybe even less exposure at the bottom where the growth promotion is the best with a higher cost of fatigue. It ends up being that if you look at the stimulus to fatigue ratio, the stimulus of doing a set completely banded is reverse banded, the fatigue is going to be higher or the same, probably higher because you're putting more weight on the bar and going closer to failure for similar amount of exertion. But on the other hand, or maybe it could be the same because we could do 15 reps versus 10 if we took it easy at the top and really pushed in the bottom. So the fatigue would be the same. But if we get more work fractionally at the bottom in 15 reps going to the bottom every time with a lot of energy to spare versus if by the time we're getting to the bottom, we're like, oh, this top out was so hard and this is still hard. And now I guess this is hard, but I have to save my energy to get the number of reps that I want, or I just end up getting fewer reps. What ends up happening is the overall stimulus is lower. So we have a higher fatigue likely with banded condition or reverse bands. The stimulus is lower. That doesn't add up. That might not be a great idea, right? And that even allows us to say that the banded condition gives us more total work per rep. Yeah, that's very possible, unlikely to happen per set, because if every rep is hard, it makes you more tired and less able to do more reps. If you adjust it somehow to get the same number of reps, then you have to reduce the amount of bottom end exposure to get more reps, and that's no good, right? Big time axial fatigue, big time fatigue altogether for what is perhaps maybe even more of a stimulus, but just by a tiny bit, and that fatigue adds up. And if you try to rig it so that the fatigue is lower, the stimulus ends up being much lower as well. So SFR-wise, banding and reverse banding for hypertrophy, because it's kind of the opposite of what we need to focus more on the bottom and less on the top, may not be the best answer. That is, in this time in scientific discovery, this video is recorded in March of 2022. At this time in discovery, a few more inklings are coming together every few months to show us that actually that bottom part of the range of motion, the big stretch part, is the most important part. So if we're taking a look at bands and reverse bands and asking fundamentally what do, they make the top harder and the bottom easier, that's probably just not the best answer for hypertrophy. Now, there are absolutely contexts in which bands can work great. They're sometimes even better than straight weight, but as a general approach of if you look at a hack squat and it's working great for you and it's giving you tons of growth and you think, should I band the hack squat? Should I band my bench press? Should I reverse band them? Unless you have a compelling reason that either obviates directly the whole problem with not enough loading at the bottom, too much at the top, or works around it or takes that punch on the chin for a good other reason. You say, well, look, if I don't band my hack squats, my knees are toast. My best advice to you is to reduce the weight and slowly work in, and your knees will be fine. They're just not used to that range of motion. But if it's really prohibitive for you for whatever reason, and the reverse banding just work great, and they do have a better SFR for you, or if that's what you have to do because the other exercises are inadmissible for injury reasons or something, by all means do it. So we don't want to close our eyes completely to bands and reverse bands, but we want to at least say, hey, look, it seems like a lot of hypertrophy occurs from a deep loaded stretch. Bands and reverse bands actually prioritize more of your work than usual, than that standard, to be at the top end. Oh, gee, that's kind of the other direction of where the literature on, hey, more hypertrophy might go this way, bottom end loading, you're going this way with bands. If you can square that somehow, by all means use them. If you can't, default to straight weight and maybe even some exercises and machines like on a cam machine system, which the cam is designed to make the shit harder at the stretch and easier at the lockout. You can even try incorporating some partial range of motion training in that bottom stretch position, which almost no one ever does because it's fucking hard. Give that some thought. If something is confusing or whatever, shoot me some comments. I'll try to get to them. I'll try to talk that shit. See you next time for more insight.